So I'm going to go through another chapter today. So we'll do chapter 3, which is not going to take very long. Everybody should know what group they're in, and the manager should be able to report whether people have done their task each week. And I want to make sure that's happening. I was going to have manager's performance review. Well, I think all I want to know is if everybody knows what group they're in and if all the managers have submitted reports. I'll do that later. And then soon, the early presentations I plan for next week, but at least one person said they might want to do it tonight. If anybody wants to give a presentation tonight, that's fine. You earn extra credit by doing it early. But the main time that everyone should plan to do a presentation on the 27th in 2 weeks, 5 minutes on whatever you've been doing. You're supposed to be doing something in addition to just studying the book, or even if it is more studying the book, but you should be able to give a 5-minute talk about something. Just so that the class all gets a chance to review something, it adds a little bit of variety, and you should all get practice doing public speaking, technical speaking and I'll time it and limit you to 5 minutes. Should not intended to be a great burden, but if it isn't easy for you to explain something clearly in 5 minutes, you should start practicing that skill. That's a really important skill. Any questions about anything? Well, all right, let's go to the textbook stuff, and then we'll see if anybody wants to give a 5-minute talk tonight. If not, they can start next week or the week after. So, asset security, which has got to be one of those meaningless titles. Anyway, so we'll talk about how you define your assets and your protection of them. So you have to classify data, which specifies what level of protection they get, then decide somebody has to take responsibility for securing the data, that's ownership, and then you have to consider how you get rid of old objects without leaking data off and put controls on them. So you have to have some kind of labels on your data. In the government, they have secret, top secret, confidential, unclassified. That's the military side of it. Businesses typically don't use those terms, but it's a similar concept. They're sensitive but unclassified. It's something that's not a matter of national security, and there's for official use only, used in the private sector. So you have to have some kind of labels stamped on your stuff so that your employees and everybody know how the own document should be treated. And you have different trash can for the highly classified stuff, so that stuff is burned or shredded, where it can't just be dumped in the trash like other things. So in the military, they have sensitive compartmented information, and this is information that has horizontal and vertical controls. The vertical controls are the secret, top secret, a designation of how trusted a human you have to be to do it, and the horizontal controls are the need to know. So even if you have top secret clearance, you're still not allowed to see this information unless you're actually on that project, because they don't want it leaking out. It is a huge issue. So this is, your compartments require an approved need to know in addition to enough clearance. And this is the current model of how much you trust humans, which is a very hazy concept, but they pretend that you can somehow rate how overall trustworthy someone is this way and how much they need to know that way and put them in a box. And as you know, the results are pretty questionable. There's an awful lot of people that leak the secrets and sell them and betray the country and go on for years without getting caught. It's very far from perfect system, but that's what we have. So clearance is the determination of how trustworthy you are, considering both your current and future trustworthiness. So if there are weaknesses like drug and alcohol abuse, personal secrets, that's bad. The most common reasons to not get it are drug use and foreign influence. My students who got security clearance have told me that if you have drug use in the past, nobody cares. They only care if you're still doing it. But they've told me if you are cheating on your wife, or I imagine women cheating on their husband, although there are less women in the game here, they don't care at all. That's perfectly fine. The only thing they care about is if you're having an affair with a foreign national, which I thought was pretty strange, because it seemed to me like cheating on your wife is something you could be blackmailed for and controlled by, even if the person you're cheating with is an American. And there was that famous general that was sleeping with a reporter and leaking the secrets to her and giving her his email password and everything else. But anyway, this, I think, is where the culture of protecting secrets hits the old macho military manly culture where men are allowed to have a harem and cheat on their wife, and that just makes them better in the old military tradition. Anyway.
Well, it's different in the military. It's illegal to commit adultery, but...
It's illegal?
Well, against the UCMJ. It's illegal.
Right, against the military code of conduct, yeah. But it doesn't seem to affect your clearance.
In the civilian side, yeah, you don't...
No, even
if you work for a corporation, cheat on your spouse.
Yeah, even in the military, I don't think it affects... People tell me it does not affect your clearance. I've asked them. which it seemed to me like it should, but
I think it depends on what the outcome of the UCMJ is.
what the what?
The outcome of the trial, the court martial.
Oh, if they have a trial, sure. But this is talking about a normal background check
Oh, yeah.
to get a clearance. And they say cheating
Yeah, I
on
never
your
heard
wife,
that if it was something in the past.
affairs are not considered relevant to that, which is curious to me. I would think it would be very relevant personally, but they did not ask my opinion.
I had to go through this process at Honeywell years ago, and
Yeah.
they wanted every place that I've ever lived, names of my neighbors.
Right. They're going to go interview your old
Every place
teachers
I've
and
ever
everything.
worked, yeah.
And I don't know. I think they're looking for evidence that you're communist or something.
I have no idea.
I kind of wonder exactly what they're looking for there. Anyway, so there's formal access approval. So you get approval to do these things. You have to know the rules and the consequences if it's lost. Then you're approved to see these sensitive documents. So need to know means you have to be approved by somebody, and you're expected to only access the things you need to know, is the idea. So you have sensitive information that requires protection. You're going to have to mark and protect both the original and backup storage of it, of course. So you have to consider how you handle it, how you store it, and how you retain it. So you're going to have separate devices, separate storage cabinets, separate trash cans and everything for the highly secret stuff. So this means you have to have owners. Owners, this is a very old concept. This is why if you are like a noble family in Britain and you inherit a big fancy castle or something, they teach their children that you are the stewards over this. It's not that you own it and you can do what you want with it. You have a responsibility to maintain it and protect it. And that's the point here. That's the sense in which they have ownerships here. So the senior management owns the business and they own the mission, which means they are responsible to make the business survive and protect it and make the mission work out. And they have to make sure that you have proper staff and review what people do. And like I said, that's what bothered me about Equifax. Equifax didn't update their stuff. They got hacked. The data got stolen. And then the senior managers tried to blame it on the technician. That brown technician didn't do it. And I said, wait a minute. You're the owner. It's your obligation to make sure that the technicians are doing what they should do. You can't just say, my technician did a rotten thing. You would say, you're the owner. You have to review what they do and hire better people or train them or something. So that's the point. So data is owned by somebody. This is the information owner, and this is the management person responsible for making sure that the proper things are done with the data. They don't probably do the work directly, but they're supposed to be managing, supervising, training, staffing, and reviewing the work of the people under them to make sure that the custodians actually are doing what they should be doing with the data. So that's the game. All right, a system owner is someone that owns the physical hardware, and they therefore have to do things like make sure that it's getting patched and locked up and secured and updated and all that jazz. In the same sense, they have the responsibility for taking care of it, or which typically is done by making other people do it and reviewing their work and training them, making sure they're doing a proper job taking care of it. The custodian is the person that actually does the work, who is getting orders from above and actually taking care of it. This is the technical people most of us have been learning to do in these classes. You learn how to properly maintain a system at the technical level. So you learn how to do all the right patches and backups and antivirus and all that jazz. But what you're doing is obeying the orders that come from above. And the orders that come from above are typically non-technical and sort of vague, like, make sure it's up to date, make sure it has the recommended protections. Your boss doesn't expect to know all the details. They expect you to figure that out. So your users, of course, are not responsible for protecting the system. They're using the system, but they also have certain rules, like don't use stupid passwords, don't share accounts, and don't go installing weird software on the machines and all that jazz. So they have certain requirements too to protect things. And then you have data controllers that create and manage the data, and data processors that do things with data on behalf of the controllers. So this is why when you outsource some of your work to someone else, you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. You are responsible for what your outsourced workers do. And if they are doing something unsafe, you can't get away with blaming them. It's your fault for hiring them and letting them do the wrong thing and not stopping that as the owner. All right, so in general, it is best just not to collect data you don't need. I know recently in the hacking lab, they were setting up some webcams to record video, and I thought that years ago. We could record video in the lab, and I said, what would happen is sooner or later someone would come to me and say, we need to see that video to see what happened in there, and then I'd have a problem. I would have created a record that now I probably really don't want to be responsible for preserving that record and producing it in response to court orders and all that. It'd be better to just not collect data if you really don't want to go through the pain of dealing with it. I know when the Snowden revelations came out that the NSA was tapping inside Yahoo and Google and everything, within a month, defense lawyers subpoenaed the NSA demanding that they cough up the records because you know where my client was. You can prove he wasn't in this location, didn't commit that crime. Which is probably true that they have that data, but they really don't want to respond to orders like that. And that's a problem. Once you have data, it's now something that could lead you down a dark hole into a place you don't want to be. As various people come to you with irritating requests to see that data, and you may not be able to just ignore them all. So here's my cahoots. Let me start the zoom. So what data requires need to know in addition to clearance? This is sensitive compartmented information with the horizontal and vertical controls. So who puts on the patches? That's the custodian that actually does the work. Or who's the manager responsible for making sure the patches are applied? I would have thought the system owner. But for some reason I thought it was data owner. I imagine it says that in the book. Seems to me like the patches are more for the system than the data. I'm dubious about this one. However, I'm not going to change it. This is the unfairness of the CISSP. This is a small taste of the real exam. The real exam has many things like this that where two answers seem equally good, and they pick one for a strange reason that I could never understand, and I just sort of memorize it long enough to pass the test. Anyway, so where are the HR people? All right, they're data controllers because they create data. That's what they say. Anyway, such is life. All right, Tony E. and Out. Memory and remnants, this is a bit of forensics. Right, this is a big issue when you are done using something and trying to throw it away or donate it to someone, there is leftover data still on it. And this is a huge problem. Everything has data on it. Even RAM has data for a while, which is how the cold boot attacks work. RAM remembers data for about 15 minutes. Low temperature conditions, but not much longer than that. But other things remember it forever, like flash drives and SSDs. And it's difficult or impossible to erase these things and be sure it's erased. RAM forgets within a few minutes. The cache on the chip forgets, and the registers are on the chip. And those all forget when the power goes off. But RAM is volatile, but ROM is not volatile. On the other hand, ROM usually has nothing important in it. All ROM has is like information about the brand of your hard drive and how many devices you have. You can freeze RAM to make the data last longer, which is useful for a couple of exotic attacks, but it's not a practical way to steal data under normal conditions. There's different kinds of RAM, DRAM and SRAM. SRAM is more expensive, but it all forgets in the absence of power. The firmware are these small programs that run your devices, and again, there's typically no personal information in there. There shouldn't be any names or email addresses or anything. It's just basic programming used to run the devices, stored in ROM chips. There's PROMs, which you write once. There's programmable devices that are field programmable, like EPROMs. It can be erased and electrically erased, which are more common these days. It used to be in the old days, if you wanted to upgrade your ROM, you had to throw away the hardware chip and plug in a new chip. Now there are ways to rewrite it for firmware upgrades. So now we get to the stuff that is more of a data remnants issue, like flash drives. I mentioned before, a survey several years ago found that the average executive owned 20 thumb drives and had lost 15 of them, and they're all full of data and typically not encrypted or protected, and that data is just floating all over the place. So this is a type of erasable, programmable ROM. It remembers when the power's off, and you can change the data on it. They're slower than mag disks, but of course they're very popular. They've taken over the role of what floppy disk used to have as something you can carry around with data on it. And it really better be encrypted if you got anything personal or important on there, which most people do. Solid state drives are faster and bigger and more expensive than thumb drives, and you can put your whole operating system and everything on. These things are very, very popular because they're so fast. One big thing about these is there's no way to erase them. even if you write over them like a magnetic hard drive, trying to put zeros in every block, you can't, because the problem with these things is they're kind of fragile, and the blocks of rewritable medium tend to fail. So when you buy one, they give you extra blocks, and they silently take the blocks that have an error and replace it with another block, so you don't know it and your computer doesn't know it. So when your computer tries to erase every block, there are blocks it cannot reach that have been marked bad, and yet they still have data and can be retrieved by a bad guy. So there's really no good way to ever erase it and be sure. Some of them have a firmware erase command, which is supposed to erase every block, but there is no way for you to verify that that has happened, because there's no way to give a command to read every block. So it is, most companies have just given up all, and they just destroy the hard drives physically. Grind up the SSD, grind up the hard drive, then you know nobody's getting the data. And any kind of electronic erasure, you really don't know if it worked. And worse than that, if you have a stack of drives, you really don't know that someone actually did erase them all. There's no way to tell just by looking at it. So in practice, whatever value a used old drive has, it's probably better to just physically destroy it than to try passing it on. Like I say, you can try to clean these, and of course you can erase most of it, but you never really know you got it all. All right. So the most secure way is, of course, to physically destroy it. The other way to do it, by the way, is the way Apple iPhones work, which is very smart. They have encryption turned on right from the very start. So everything that is ever written on it is encrypted, and when you hit erase, it erases the key. That actually works. In practice, that works. There was a forensic company that bought 100 used iPhones, and they ran them through forensic tools, and they were unable to retrieve any data off any of them. So if you have an iPhone and you want to erase it and sell it to somebody, you can do that with complete safety. And on top of that, the clean only takes a second, because it doesn't have to wipe over the whole drive. All the clean does is delete the key. Poof, okay. Now it's back to factory defaults, and you can hand it to somebody. This is great, but it only works if it has been encrypting right from the very beginning before you typed in any passwords or anything. If you have an Android, use it for a while, then turn on encryption. You do not have this protection because there is some data stored on it that was not encrypted, and you never really know you've got all that off. All right, so data destruction is a big issue. How do you get rid of stuff? Deleting a file, this is the most common mistake. Deleting a file does not erase its contents at all. It's easy to recover it with undelete utilities and forensic software. So you have to write on top of it. Shredding or wiping, a single pass is enough. Some people believe in this thing they used to call a DoD wipe with 14 passes. That only applies to a generation of hard drives from 20 years ago. All modern hard drives, one pass is enough to restore that data to where there is no known way to get it back. Further passes are just some kind of overkill to hope that maybe it'll work against some future technology that doesn't exist yet. Degaussing is trying to hit it with a magnet. It sounds pretty good, but the magnet would have to be very strong, and I'm dubious about modern hard drives. They keep making the hard drives store more and more data, and the magnet is closer and closer to the head, and the magnetic field is stronger and stronger, so whatever magnet you're using is less and less effective. Yeah?
Isn't the drives, aren't they shielded better too from electromagnetic interference now as well? Or I mean,
They might be.
Electronics in general seem to be.
They might be. That's another issue. Yeah, that's why, I don't know how practical this is. I don't know anybody that actually does this. What they do is just physically destroy the drive, because you can easily verify that that's been done. Yeah.
I did it one time. Some backup tapes, degaussed.
Backup date, did it work?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
I drilled through them too, just to make sure.
Yeah, that's an issue. Yeah. I mean, that's why if I was the manager, I would just physically destroy it, because it's pretty easy to verify that got done. Whereas if you have a pile of them, they say, oh, I erased them. How do you really know that? Yeah.
My first job, I worked in a hospital. They gave me the logistics to not wipe it, but we basically had a business agreement with a third-party shredder for paper and media, and we had a locked bin, and we just barcoded all the serial numbers of the drives on a sheet, and then shoved them all in the media waste bin, and then the guys came out with a truck that actually had a shredder, and just literally throw the drives in it, and just destroy all of them.
Yep, that's it. I know Iron Mountain will do that. They will shred it right in front of you. So you don't even see it go in a truck and get drived off. They shred it right there, so you can have your person verify, yes, sir, that data is shredded. Yeah.
The problem with the Degausser that I faced is that when you put a hard drive in the Degausser, it destroys everything, including the firmware. So you cannot connect it to a computer. The computer could not detect it anymore.
Okay, well. Well, that sounds like it's
it's
working.
a doubt. We do not know if it works or not.
Well, that's it. That's right.
But the drive doesn't work, so
Yeah, you're right. That's another issue. That's the thing. You don't really know you got it all. That's why, physically destroying it is so much better.
but degaussing is much faster. Yeah,
Well,
I understand. But
destroying it could be pretty fast. I know guys they say they go to Home Depot and they rent a log splitter. Chunk, chunk. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, physically destroying is popular. Destroy the paper, destroy the drive. This is considered pretty good. By the way, I've never heard anybody worry about this, but at DEF CON about 6 years ago, they had a contest to take CDs that had been broken into pieces and stick them back together and recover the data. And people were putting them together and putting nail polish on them, and they were able to get like 3/4 of the data back. So I wonder about physically destroying it. If you really wanted that data, couldn't you sort of piece it back together? And I never heard anybody doing that, but in principle, I guess you could, yeah.
I know there's a video. If I find it, I'll send it to you. There's a guy with literally one of those big shredders, and you can literally throw a full-size ATX PC tower on it, and it will shred the entire thing.
Yeah, but those are expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
It'll
right.
Destroy everything you throw in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one option. Anyway, right. Of course, you really have to grind it up. Other things like putting a computer through a fire does not erase the data. If you go to drive savers, they've recovered data from from computers that have melted in houses that were on fire, that have been thrown at the bottom of a lake for a year, have been in a car that sunk to the bottom of the bay, and they can get data back off all that. So, don't just assume that a disaster that looks terrible actually just erased the data. So what component retains data longer when it's cooled? I'm not aware of any tests of cooling brain tissue.
They
might work.
They have a cooling cap for like babies. I remember there was something about for medicine, not for
To prevent fever or something, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is, by the way, I think this is a real classic CISSP question because in principle, of course, everything lasts longer when cooled, but it's only an issue for the RAM, where it actually moves from a time that is unimportant out to a time that actually matters for certain attacks. Anyway, all right, which one can only be written once? All right, that's prom. All right. Which device has garbage collection? Yes, the SSD. I didn't mention it, but it did go by on the slides. SSDs automatically erase unused data, but they don't erase all of it. What they're doing is it's very slow to erase a block. So rather than make you wait when it's time to save a file to erase a block, it moves the data around like defragmenting in the background and tries to make empty blocks so they're available. So in fact, if you store data on a magnetic hard drive and then just use it for a while, the old data just stays there forever. But on SSDs, it mostly just evaporates quickly because of this background garbage collection, but it doesn't get 100% of it. It does get most of it though, yeah.
Sam, didn't you make a video about this?
I did.
Yeah.
We talk at DEF CON. The problem is it only works about half the time.
Oh, okay.
It only works if your drive is connected a certain way, if it's the latest version, if your operating system is the latest version. That's why the end result is, when people just first learned about this about 5 years ago, they thought it would be the end of computer forensics. There'd be no longer any leftover data on any of the drives. And it's not that simple, but it is in that direction. About half the drives actually don't keep the deleted files anymore because of this, but the other half do.
Is that what they call trim?
Yes.
Okay.
Trim is the command from the operating system that, see, the problem with magnetic hard drives is they do not know when a file has been deleted. When you delete a file, you make a mark in a table somewhere, but the drive doesn't know that it's an NTFS formatted drive. It doesn't understand any of that. You just stores a bit. It doesn't know whether you're using sectors or not, so it doesn't erase them. All the intelligence is in the computer. But SSDs have intelligence locally, and if you send the trim command to them, then it informs them that this file is no longer in use, and you may now garbage collect it. So only sometimes do you have the latest of everything running to enable this process. There was a question over here, yeah.
And wouldn't that create a more a forensic availability too with the things that haven't been erased yet?
Well, that's the issue. If you have an SSD on a modern machine, as soon as you delete a file, it's actually zeroed on the drive within a second or two. As opposed to a magnetic hard drive, where it's not erased until a new file goes on top of it. So you find all kinds of old stuff on the drive. An SSD set up correctly has almost nothing that's been deleted. most of it vanishes within a few seconds. There's just a few fragments hanging around. So you might think it's probably safer, but from viewpoint of absolute security, it's no different because there are fragments left. And so the question is, are you worried about losing 1% of your data? Does that really make you feel better than losing 99% of your data? And in fact, in practice, they're both horrible because you want to tell your customers we secured the data, you want to tell your government agencies we secured the data, and saying, well, we mostly secured the data and let 1% leak out is usually not good enough. Anyway. All right, I think there's another one, yeah. So you're discarding an unencrypted SSD. How should you clean it? Physically destroying it is the only way to be safe. All right, so E times 2 and password and John E. Your data security controls. Certification means that you have satisfied the data owner and they've decided to approve the use of your product. Accreditation, well, certification means you meet a certain standard. Accreditation means the data owner has agreed that you're good enough. Those two do not necessarily go together, just like you can earn a certification like CISSP, and that may or may not convince an employer that they want you. They might say that's enough, they might not feel like that's enough. All right, so there are various standards out there, like PCI DSS. If you take credit card data that has certain rules about your stuff must be encrypted here and there and not stored in this manner. There's Octave available from Carnegie Mellon. There's the ISO 27000. ISO 27000 is extremely big and burdensome. Our college is going through the educational version of it called Student Learning Outcomes. ISO takes like typically 4 years and several $1 million to do at your company. You have to add a lot of management. And what it means is you have a giant feedback loop where your upper management makes policies, your middle management makes implementations. At the bottom, you have your workers actually doing stuff. Then you have reviews of all this going up. And then you have a review stage where you measure how well your policies achieved your goal, and you improve your policies to improve your adherence to the goal, and you have to have a blizzard of paper and forms being filed everywhere proving that you've done all this. And this is why a hammer costs $800 in the Army, because everything has to prove that it has this giant management system to make sure that everything is properly reviewed at all these levels. And if you have this certification, you can then sell to military contractors and big companies that demand it, and that's why people go through the burden of doing it. And that's what happened to the college. It started on the East Coast, and in the last 3 decades it's moved across the country. The college accreditation bodies have demanded basically the version of this at every college. And it turns into an enormous bureaucratic load where we all have to fill out many, many forms. We have to give each student like 3 different kinds of grades at the end of every semester. And this all has to be create a blizzard of reports, which in fact nobody looks at around here, but they would like to imagine somebody looks at them. But that's because we're in the early stages of it. It typically takes about 30 years at a college before this turns from a meaningless waste of time into something that has any actual value. I don't know how long it is to companies. Anyway, COBIT is another one from ISACA, a group you can join if you like. One of the many, ISACA and ISSA and ISC squared, all similar groups for security professionals. This is another governance model. There's ITIL, which is another model for IT service management, and they all are bureaucratic models of various layers of management and forms and reports going back and forth to prove that you have met these standards, and the people you do business with may want you to make some of these in order to satisfy their compliance requirements. So you got scoping and tailoring. I've come across this when helping people gain PCI DSS certification. There is a standard like PCI which says you got to do these 10 things, but in fact every business is unique. And the way, for example, some portions of the standard might not apply to you. Like you might not have any wireless network, so all the rules about the wireless network don't matter. That's scoping. Then there's tailoring. You may not be able to do certain things they want you to do. And you might have to make an argument that I cannot use whatever kind of encryption you're asking for because it's not an option with the stuff I'm using. I have to do something else or add some other control to convince you that I have achieved the goal without exactly doing what you want. And I may have mentioned before, there's a guy named Joe Klein, who is an expert in IP version 6, and he is also a troublemaker. And he went to a conference at Google that I went to, an IPv6 implementer conference, and there were people there from the federal government. And the federal government rules at that time required that you had network address translation. because the rules had been written in an IPv4 only world. But in IP version 6, implemented correctly, there is no network address translation, and you are strongly encouraged not to use it. So he was trying to ask this question to the back of the room. People were trying to make him shut up because they were all breaking the law because they had to, because the law didn't apply to IP version 6 correctly and hadn't been updated. There was no way to move to IP version 6 without violating portions of the old standards. And that's an issue. That's this tailoring thing. You know, the rules may not exactly apply to you, and so you have to have some degree of human intervention. When I got my CISSP certification, my first cert was Associate of ISC Squared, and I had to sign an agreement agreeing to the 4 fundamental principles. And one of the fundamental principles is that you will not associate with criminals. And I said, I'm not going to sign that. I give talks at DEF CON. I'm absolutely at conferences with criminals. That's part of my job. And so I refused to agree to that and appealed to a higher level so a human panel could decide whether I was good enough or not. And they did approve me. But that's the kind of thing, you know, you often do not fit exactly within the letter of the rules, and you have to get a human to can review your situation and decide if some alternative will work. You got to protect your data, typically protecting data in motion and data at rest. Drive and tape encryption is data at rest, so you have to protect it. And the idea is even if someone breaches your physical security and they're able to actually steal the tapes, you would like to believe there is some other layer of protection like encryption so that doesn't really reveal your data. The most important thing, of course, is mobile devices like cell phones and laptops and thumb drives and all that. Those things are clearly out there getting lost and stolen all the time, and you've got to have some defense. Whole disk encryption is by far your best defense. Remote wipe is a very inferior second substitute because if you have a remote wipe on 100 cell phones at your company, at the end of the year, maybe 20 of those cell phones are gone. Some of them will never reconnect to the network at all. You will never be able to remote wipe them. So you don't know that happened. For example, how some of them are actually lost. They're in the seat cushion on the side of the road. They're not even stolen, but they're gone out of your control and you don't know. The other thing that's always bothered me, although I've never heard anybody talk about this at any conferences, is remote wipe is garbage because how do you know they didn't copy the data before you wiped it? So remote wipe, you know, makes some people feel better, but encryption is what you really want. Then you can really say, no matter how many phones are lost, nobody got the data.
Yeah, and if somebody pulls the SIM card out and put their own in, it's not even the same phone anymore.
Right, that's right. That Apple, it's all encrypted. Of course, the one thing I wonder is if some clown wrote their password on a piece of masking tape stuck to the cell phone, and maybe your encryption's not so wonderful in that case. Yeah.
I believe that the newer devices, I mean, I know in my company we have encryption, we encrypt the devices.
Yeah.
We also have remote wipe so that we can remote
Right.
wipe. But I think the newer Apple devices have a lock where you can lock them if you have MDM on them. And so if someone wipes it and then tries to, like you said, put a new SIM card in or just factory wipe it, the device is actually bricked. You can't
Right.
restore, like it's literally, they can't reuse the device.
Yeah, that's the idea, and that's just to discourage theft. That was what the FBI asked Apple to do about 5 years ago because the #1 crime in America, rapidly growing, was iPhone theft. People would steal them all the time, and they said, you gotta make it so if someone steals it, they can't wipe it and get some good out of it. So they did that, and then they came and said, hey, we want to get this photo. They said, we encrypted it. They said, what did you do that for? And they're like, we hate you so much. You made us do it, and now you're mad at us for doing it. But you know, there's two sides to that. Protecting from crooks, you want everything encrypted, so let the cops in their search warrant, they want everything unencrypted, and so these two voices are always yelling, and there's no way to please everybody. Anyway, so then you got to move your data off-site to back it up. So you got to have a secure company. I know companies I worked for used to do stuff like just take a low-paid employee and get them to like stick it in their car and drive it home and put it on the shelf, and then backup tapes are stolen from cars, and cars are stolen with the tapes in them, and now you're sorry that you weren't encrypting that and doing something intelligent with it. You should be using somebody like Iron Mountain that will show up with a armored car and lock that thing up and treat it like money. Anyway, you certainly do have to get your data off-site somehow because your whole building could burn down, and then you're going to really wish you had another copy of that stuff somewhere else. And then there's data in motion. While it's being transmitted over your network, the best thing you want is end-to-end encryption, where it is encrypted at every step of the way. This is what all of us have been yelling at for 15 years, and it was Edward Snowden that finally brought it to us, because everybody, until Edward Snowden's revelation, all the big companies, even like Yahoo and Google, did not encrypt data within the company. They only encrypted it when it's going out to the internet. They said, well, inside the company, that's inside our trusted perimeter. We can just send plain text everywhere. And so the NSA just put a spying device on your LAN and stole all the data. So now people are actually encrypting it in the LAN. And you should be just encrypting it every time you send it over any kind of wire, because there's no such thing as a trusted network. People are bringing in cell phones, and there's no way in the world you really trust a network. You should be encrypting it every time you send it over. Yeah.
Is putting data in the cloud, is that data in motion?
Yes. While you send data to the cloud, like iCloud or something, that's in motion. And once it gets there, it's data being stored. And almost every cloud service encrypts that now. I don't know anybody that sends it with anything other than HTTPS anymore. And that's pretty much because of Edward Snowden. Before that, people were really sleazy about this and that, and which makes, by the way, no sense at all. Now everyone imagines they're hiding from the NSA by encrypting their stuff. It's just like politics always is. It raised popular awareness to where the customers want to hear their stuff is encrypted. But hiding from the NSA is still no more possible than it ever was. But anyway, there are just certain events make it fashionable. That's the hard thing about politics. There were a bunch of previous scandals that in a logical world should have made everyone demand encryption, but none of them mattered. Like there was a program you could install from Torcon about 6 years ago that would just let you get in everybody's social media account at Starbucks. This guy's email, this guy's Facebook, this guy's Twitter, just everywhere. Because you could just steal the cookies because nothing was encrypted properly. And the guy put that out, had 1 million downloads, everybody was just hacking everybody's account everywhere. We said, that'll do it, surely they'll encrypt it. Well, it happened a couple of weeks later, everybody forgot about it and kept on going, nothing happened. It's just the world of politics. Something has to make a big enough splash for people to care, and it has very little to do with the actual logic or results. Yeah.
Sam, is that the what you're talking about, end-to-end encryption? Is that the I'm trying to think of the term? It's the concept. Is the concept behind it the zero trust network? And that's that like new phrase they're using in networking. Zero trust.
Yeah, I think a zero trust network is a little more sophisticated, but that's the idea. You don't trust any link.
There's no perimeter that's safe.
That's the idea. There's no perimeter safe. You should just be encrypting everything, and that's where people are. Because, for example, some of your laptops are owned. Some of your machines have malware on them. So even your trusted company machines, you can't trust them too much. And that's the modern model. And it's also the old rule is defense in depth. You just never trust any of your preventive measures to work 100%, and you put more controls behind them. Yeah. All right. And I think that's it for this one. So I got a few last cahoots, and then we'll take a break and we will see if people want to give a talk early today. There was one taker so far, and there might be more. All right. I've labeled this. This is 125, 213. That was when Google got pulled out of China, and we started having the APTs everywhere. It was when people first started talking about the zero trust. They said, we don't trust anything. So how do you run a business when some of your machines have malware on them and you just accept that's going to be a certain amount of that going on all the time? And I said, well, you've been running business all along. Some of your employees are crooks and some of them are incompetent, and you don't let that stop you, so you just have to knock it off. No part of anything is perfect, and you just get the job done anyway. You just try to get enough controls so that not too much evil is happening, and you accept some need for review and correction as various forms of harm happen. All right, let's see. I think it is. I think I've had 10 seconds with no new people. All right. International standard. That's ISO, that's what they're all about, the International Standards Organization. All right. Which standard came from ISACA? COBIT, right? So what's the process that determines what part of the standard you're going to use? Okay, that's scoping, what they call it. All right. And what do you have to do after a breach? And then you have to pressure Congress to drop the case. That used to be how you did it. Anyway,
Pay enough money.
which is advanced politics.
Yeah.
Rather than fixing the problem, you just figure out how to get away with it.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. For those of you who've met me, who hasn't met me, I've been taking classes here in the CNIT department for a while, and I have been a consultant in the information technology world for some time. I wanted to go first too because I just wanted to show you it's nothing to be scared of. You don't need to worry. Like, lightning talks are very common. The sooner you get comfortable giving them, the better off you're going to be, because this is a mini version of what you're going to have to do on the job as an information security professional. So you may have noticed the title of this lightning talk is How to Discuss Information Security with Hostile Audiences. And you know, we think, well, why is this even an issue?
Already cut off your graphics.
I don't know why that's cut off.
Your slides suck.
And hecklers, thank you, Sam. You're really lending some authenticity here. So, why is this even an issue? Every company wants to be, they're risk aware, they want to be secure, right? We think that, you know, don't trust people in the cyber world is common sense, but it's really not. You know, we go in and we see vulnerabilities and holes everywhere, but it's really not much of an issue in these bigger companies. So why? What are some reasons for this? So, man, this is a bummer here, but we're just gonna have to run with it. So let me try seeing if this helps at all. So
That looks like a
some of those reasons that prioritization might be low is that so a lot of executives prioritize productivity over security awareness because they think just getting stuff shipped out is the most important thing, and your stack of debt is this high, but we're not going to pay attention to that. Sometimes they just don't know. They think, well, nobody wants to hack me. I'm not a target, so it's not a problem. Sometimes it's willful ignorance. They know that bad things are happening or could happen, but they're just not going to do anything about it, so they're going to stick their head in the sand, kind of like our robot that drove itself into the fountain here. It says everything's fine, but then it just drives itself right into the pool. So some other issues are lack of metrics. There's nothing to show them why this stuff's a problem. Lack of sufficient resources. They think, okay, even if we identify these problems, there's no way we're going to be able to fix it. And the last reason there is that they get lumped in with the rest of tech debt, and instead of added to the active agenda, like it's not going on the backlog because it's not shipping a new feature. So we might want to say, you know, you sit on a throne of lies. This might be our initial response to call them out on their BS. But that's not really the best. That's not really the best move. You don't want to react with alarm, even if you find horrifying things. You don't want to be condescending. You don't want to blame and shame the IT staff or the software engineers or the sales department or the secretaries, anybody. It's just not constructive. It's not going to help you. Don't try to present your information without sufficient evidence or metrics or intelligence to back up what you're saying. Make sure you vet your findings so you don't just like find something and go running off to them without confirming that it's a real problem first. Don't present your information without making a business case for remediation and explaining why it's going to be valuable. And the biggest one on here is probably the last one, which is don't present this information without solutions for each problem that you've identified. You know, they think when you tell them this stuff that this is going to be the outcome. Okay, well, they're going to force us to put in all these controls that are just going to make life hell, and it's not going to improve anything, so we're not going to listen to what they have to say. So a more effective approach to take is to make sure everybody in the company understands that you're on their team. Make sure that they know that you're not an adversary. You're there to help them. You're working with them to make their business better, not against them to make them look stupid. deliver the news without, don't minimize the seriousness of the situation, but make sure that, you know, like, hey, we found all these problems, but it's not a problem because we're going to tell you how to fix each and every single one. So they're not going to have, you know, that you're going to create a feeling, a positive feeling on behalf of your client or behalf of the company that you're working in, that you're going to help them get through this security crisis that you've identified for them. Make an excellent business case for all of your claims and proposed remediations, because they're not going to care unless they have numbers to back it up, and you can tell them exactly how this is going to save or make them money. The last one on here is to detail the remediation plan for them. You know, that's your solutions that you come up with. And then don't just act like they're going to be on their own with this plan. Let them know that you're going to teach them exactly how to implement it. So this picture that got cut off, it says cyber defense goals. First one is no crying. That's been crossed out because we know that that's not going to happen. Second one's less crying. Then try not to cry. And then the last one that's not crossed out is create realistic goals. So it's important when you look at this organization and their needs that you create realistic plan for them to implement, and not something that's gonna like set them up for failure out of the gate. Also, encourage and reward honesty. You wanna make sure that your clients or your team that you're working with is not gonna lie to you, because if they see you as their adversary, they're gonna start not telling you things that are gonna make your job a lot harder to do, and they're gonna shoot themselves in the foot and you in the foot, because you're not going to be able to be effective in helping them secure their problems. So this, unfortunately, is also super key. I'll email this to Sam. It's a good guideline to go off of in terms of how to kind of present this to management, because you want to make sure that you kind of hit all these points. Now, the first one is to assess. You want to make sure you assess their current and future security position by looking at, you know, where is this organization now, and what are some issues that they're likely to face if they continue along the same path. You want to analyze the information you got, align it with business concerns, and then make sure you communicate it to them. This is the other kind of key slide I want you guys to see, which is making sure that you use numbers, aligning the security risks with business value, compliance, where you really highlight the need to invest in security to avoid serious penalties. That's going to get a lot of C-levels on your side, and presentations, because management loves them. And then the final thing here is deliver on your promises. You know, this is kind of funny because it's a company that created a chat feature that their customers are supposed to be able to use, but you can't contact them ever. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're delivering and actually building a good relationship with these companies, so they want to continue to work with us and keep making things more secure. So that's the end of my talk. Does anybody have any questions? All right, questions.
Didn't suck.